is what it is.
Nah, you good. You good. You can show them the muscles. The muscles.
Hey, that's all it is, man. I'm motivated to get back in the gym.
Yeah. So we live. We live. We live. This is the chop up. We're gonna give it a second for for folks to come on in here. We got a special conversation that we're gonna have today.
Oh yeah. Hey, and guess what? You know what I'm saying? Specifically to all my black people. Y'all know on the chop up, we done had a few conversations about anti-Semitism. Today, however, we have us some experts. One just happened to be a black woman that's gonna give us a nice little, I feel like analysis. That's what I'm gonna call it, an analysis of the diversity, or I should put it, plurality of the what I'm saying, Jewish community and black community. Because you know that sometimes I feel like a lot of times we have an erasure of the people that live in the intersections. So a lot of times we talk about Jewish people and we forget that there are like black Jews and shit like that. So you know what I'm saying, the importance of this conversation is for that today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. And for we are going to revisit the conversation because we're gonna get it because this the conversation of diversity amongst the Jewish people is going to be one that's going to span some time. But before we get into that, we do want to deal with something we talked about last week for this Snapchat. We're gonna do a Snapchat update. We're gonna update y'all on Kwame Brown and some predictions that we made. You know what I'm saying? That just so happened to come true when it came to Kwame Brown. So y'all stay tuned. We're gonna get started in just a bit. Y'all know how we do when it come in. Make sure you say where you from.
What up,
say what's
Jada?
Up to the fam. Say what's up to our, you know what I'm saying?
Eric Kane, Ethereal Beauty. You know, y'all know education is elevation. I really feel like we've been having some dry ass conversations about anti-Semitism, and I'm really excited today about this one that's gonna have a little flavor, a little texture. You know what I'm saying? So
just a little bit, because it's because as much as we run our fucking mouth, like let's be for real here, like we run our mouth about some shit that we kind of know a little bit about. But it's always good, you know what I'm saying, even as intellectuals amongst ourselves, to bring in other intellectuals that know a little bit more about some shit we don't. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. I got to get, I had to get schooled. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes I feel like a lot of times the best way for you to learn some shit is for you to have to be schooled. You know what I'm saying? And shout out to the people in the Jewish community that had to school my ass. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, Tyler, if you disrespect my beard one more time, I'm blocking you.
Yeah, man. Who you with though? Y'all introduce yourself to the people. I feel like why they coming in. You know what I'm saying?
Hi, I'm Shakina. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area. I am a Black Jewish educator, and I'm on TikTok at Shakina. I think I'm at Shakina across platforms, actually. So if you're interested in learning more about diversity in the Jewish community, definitely give me a follow. And yeah.
Hey, I'm Aaron. I'm an anti-Zionist Ashkenazi Jew. I'm at Rhythm Inc. on TikTok. I talk a lot about anti-Zionism, what's going on with Israel-Palestine right now, trying to deconstruct a lot of that stuff because a lot of folks have it wrong. And then in my spare time, I'm a mathematician.
Right on. So they're going to be the ones.
Mathematician in there too. Like, shout out to you.
Look, you know what I'm saying? So shit, they are going to be the ones who are going to be elevating the conversation with some education on the diversity of the Jewish population, as well as what that means for the conversations that we have about Palestine and Israel and all of that type of shit. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, in the Alliance time, baby, she is not a Black Hebrew Israelite. She is a Black Jew.
Of course, look, Africa. Don't forget we on YouTube. So when you say Black Jew,
you know what I'm saying. but I'm making this. I'm just answering the question. I try to answer respectfully too. You feel me? I hope I ain't putting nothing on that. You know what I'm saying? But just But we got. I feel like.
Yes.
Can you
I am
give us
a mainstream Jew. I am a Black Ashkenazi Jew. I'm part of the rabbinical Jewish movement. I'm Masorti. The name of the movement that I'm a part of is the Masorti movement. It's known as the conservative Jewish movement. It's a little bit less religious than Orthodox and a little bit more formal than Reform.
And now look, she about to educate us, right? They both bar. Ryan. I mean, he calls himself Aaron, but you know what I'm saying? As long as he's on the chop up, he is Ryan. But we definitely go ahead and break, you know what I'm saying, break down some information on that. It'd be interesting to see if some of my Hebrew Israelite brothers join in the conversation to see what they got to say about what we talking about in the chat. But before we do that, you know, we always got to start the show the way we always start the show. So Aaron and Shakina, we're gonna put y'all in the back real quick, just so we can get it started. And now Toya will not be here, and I'll explain that after we start the show. But let's get it. Here we go.
Me, my guys, we really lie. Lord, forgive me, pay my tithes. Please don't have me reach inside. And that's in the console. Keep the semi when I ride. Lit off Henny when I drive. In the city, we gon' slide. Bet I be there pronto.
Yeah, man. We locked in. Shout out to everybody that's getting they jumping off their summer off smooth. You know what I'm saying? You know, hot girl summer. You know what I'm saying? Hot boy summer. I don't know what you want to call it. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? And,
it's the summertime. It's the Will Smith summertime.
You know, shout out to my non-gender conforming people as well. You feel me? Hope y'all have a hot summer too. You know what I'm saying? Today is May 31st, Memorial Day. You know, it's George Lee, aka Conscious Lee. Don't forget the Lee. Who I'm with today?
Yo, y'all know what it is. It's your boy Damo, the political plug. We do have some other special guests that we're gonna bring on. That's gonna break down a large part of the conversation. We're talking about the Jewish identity, the diversity of it today. We're touching on Kwame Brown today, but we definitely, as y'all can see, point out and see that there is a body missing. Toya G is having technical difficulties. She got I think we got Cox out here. We got Cox, so we got Spectrum. I'm lying. Toya got Spectrum on the phone trying to figure out what's going on. Her bills are paid, so this is some bullshit. She should be here, but she is having technical difficulties, so she won't be able to join the conversation. But we do have some guests that are going to be able to provide some solace and support for Consciously and I as we struggle to get through this episode without the heart and soul of the chop up. That's Toya G. But to start the show, before we get into the greater conversation that we are to have today, today's Snap Chop, I wanted to just be a quick update on Kwame Brown because it's some things that we said last week to kind of predict some things that's going on with Kwame Brown, and we've seen these things come out and play out in some real aspects and ways. We pointed out how Kwame Brown had been on the internet for quite some time, and he had been on some bullshit on some of his videos, and that bullshit is actually starting to come to catch up with him because he is currently engaging in some type of beef with Tommy Sotomayor. Now, George, do you know who Tommy Sotomayor is?
I only know a little bit. I feel like he was Kevin Samuels before Kevin Samuels giving dudes advice about women and talking shit about women to appeal to dudes, even though he's supposed to be straight.
Right. Tommy Sotomayor is one of the first niggas who figured out that you can gain clout on YouTube and on social media by talking shit about black women. Tommy Sotomayor is known for being in. I think he was went viral because he got into an altercation with a black woman where he called her all out of her name, disrespected her being black, all sorts of, you know what I'm saying, many different type of ways. So if you know about the internet, you know about Tommy Sotomayor being a piece of shit. Come to find out, Tommy Sotomayor and Kwame Brown were actually cool before Kwame blew up. Did you know this, George?
No, I did not know this.
You did not know that Kwame Brown was cool with black woman hating ass Tommy Sotomayor. Kwame Brown actually was on Tommy Sotomayor's platform years ago. Now tell everybody out there that's on that, nigga, Kwame Brown speaking the truth. Kwame Brown know what he's talking about. What does it say about Kwame Brown? That's the type of nigga he fucking with, Tommy Sotomayor. George, in your eyes, what does it say about Kwame Brown that he is fucking with a black woman hating nigga like Tommy Sotomayor?
I'm keeping a stack with you, man. Shit, tomorrow I'm finna dip in some of that mama's cooking nigga be talking about, man. 'Cause I feel like I'm just calling cap on all of it. You feel me? It's like a broken clock getting it right twice a day. And shit, it was 12:30 p.m., 12:30 a.m. It's no longer that time no more. So that nigga wrong. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, bro, you was coming at Jamel Hill, coming at her neck, you know what I'm saying, about who she taking pictures with and what she doing and all that there. And then man, I ain't got time. It is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, this is it's not really news, but the reason why I want to touch on it is because this is how easy it is that we fall into these traps of like, who are our messengers? Right? Like, we listening to him hard and we saying that he's speaking the truth primarily because he's criticizing people who use their larger platforms to demean black people, black men specifically. But when you associate yourself with somebody who uses their platform to demean black women, that like what makes you interesting, what makes you positive, what makes you useful is canceled out. It's canceled out. Because it ain't about black people no more. Now it's about you being embarrassed. Now it's about your personal beef. Because you can't be saying you doing this for black people if you are aligning yourself with other people that, you know what I'm saying, shit on black people. You feel me?
I just think that as a country, I feel like country nigga, Kwame, bro. I feel like you didn't razzle dazzle the people with some good jargon and being able to make some sound analysis about some things that's gonna touch us emotionally, specifically when you talk about tearing down, hyper criminalizing black men. But I think that you didn't get this with the folk, like the 52 fake out. Well, you've been able to talk about how you care so much about black men, and then you've been aligning yourself with people like Candace Owens, talking shit about Black Lives Matter, aligning yourself with Tommy Sotomayor, whatever his name is. I don't even want to pronounce his name right because it sounds like you're somebody don't need to have his name pronounced right. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, bro, I can't wait. And I want you to reply to me with that crazy shit because I got time too.
Yeah, I mean, this reason why we bringing this up specifically is because we made I think Toya made the comment about the other shoe dropping. And George, specifically, you said that like we'll deal with Kwame's like the fucked up politics that he got. You said specifically that we'll deal with that when it comes, when it's time to cross that bridge. Nigga, it's time to cross the bridge. It's time to cross the bridge, bro. Because you're not about to preach to black people about who is demeaning black people, and that's who you fucking with. Go ahead.
This so we get what specifically, like what messed their relationship up, Tony and Kwame? They was good. Now they ain't good. You know, what happened?
Some petty shit. Kwame, so Tommy wanted Kwame on his show once Kwame was blowing up. I guess Kwame pulled some flake shit and didn't show up or canceled on Tommy. And then had Judge Joe Brown on his shit. Now, let's be clear. Judge Joe Brown is another motherfucker. Like his old, I mean, yeah, we used to watch the show. He was the black Judge Judy and all that shit. But shit, other than him being black, it ain't too many differences but him and motherfuckers like Judge Judy. He's just somebody else who really builds his online presence outside of him being a courtroom TV judge. He built his online presence by demeaning and talking shit about black people and black culture. And in this conversation with Kwame Brown, specifically demeaned black women. I think he was talking about Lizzo and called her a whale, you know what I'm saying? All type of shit. You feel me? Like it took it too far. You feel me? Like and now them other roots are starting to show. So we had Judge Joe Brown flaked on Tommy. So Tommy was like, nigga, before you blew up, I had you on my show. So now that you blew up, you got these niggas who didn't want to fuck with you and you flaking on me. And so now, you know, Tommy's angry. So I mean, which I don't really give a fuck because I don't fuck with Tommy Sotomayor anyway. So I don't care if I agree with him or don't agree with him. But ultimately, these people and these figures that y'all turn into the heroes like of the day, like the folk heroes of the day, that y'all just let it be like, yeah, that's what we need to listen to. That's what we need to pay attention to who they align themselves with. Pay attention to who they associate with. You know what I'm saying? Because you can't lecture the people about who's talking bad about black people when you aligning yourself with motherfuckers that's talking bad about black people consciously.
Yeah, man. We're gonna leave it alone, man. Y'all tune in tomorrow. I'm gonna pull out the receipts. You know what I'm saying? I think that Kwame Brown really doing a lot of things that's parasitic to the black community, especially because I know the people that he ultimately want to have the appeal of and want to have the attention of, they gonna call us emotional. They gonna say that we sensational, and they gonna say that we always feel about feelings. All Kwame Brown did was talk to our feelings, emotions, sensations, and feelings. And then as soon as we turn on his ass, because we see that his ass is a broken clock, all he gonna try to do is use that as a martyr. That's what black conservatives do. He gonna martyr himself and say that white conservatives, this is why y'all should love me, because them niggas was riding with me when I was talking shit about them over there, and now I'm talking shit about that. They ain't riding with me no more. Like literally, I called it. I knew that was gonna happen. You know what I'm saying? And it's just now we're gonna see that. Now we're gonna be able to call out all the bullshit. And the last thing I'll say, you know what I'm saying? To y'all know how to be on my helmet, hating on me on, you know what I'm saying, TikTok. If I say anything specifically when it has to do with blackness and black people, imagine if my black ass was talking about light-skinned people like the way he talking about Matt Barnes. Imagine that shit. They would call me, I'm being racist to my own people. They'll tell me I'm authenticating blackness. They'll tell me, you know what I'm saying? But I'm telling you, it's like a whole bunch of conservative contradictions, and to me, a whole bunch of just hypocrisy in it. And I think that, you know, the tap dance of Kwame Brown doing to get them likes and them views. Shout out to you, bro. Shout out to you, fam. But you know what I'm saying? Shit, I think that, bro, you're gonna be a bust in this shit too.
Hey, that's the Snapchat. That's the Snapchat. Yeah, you know, we like to keep it quick, and on point and direct. If there's anything to follow up with that, we will definitely keep y'all up to date. But that's all it is right now. But let's go ahead and get into this real conversation, this big chop. We're gonna bring on our guests, Shakina and Aaron. And go ahead, George. You go ahead.
Yeah, man.
This conversation.
Hey, shout out to the wonderful community of TikTok. Don't get me wrong, there's some assholes over there in TikTok, but there's also some amazing, beautiful, I feel like people that thirst for knowledge and to have relationships with different people on TikTok. And I feel like these two people we're about to have this conversation with is one of those people. I feel like we're gonna structure this conversation around the diversity in the Jewish community before I start getting into the actual like background of how I'm saying fuck the money up. And I feel like what we call it, I feel like it definitely was anti-Semitic. Would it be ahistorical as well? Did I make an ahistorical claim? Would it be technically ahistorical too? Ahistorical anti-Semitic claim?
I don't think you got ahistorical. I think you stepped in some anti-Semitism that, you know, really is used to erase Western anti-Semitism, American anti-Semitism, European anti-Semitism. So you didn't make an ahistorical claim because you never claimed that it didn't apply to us ever. But you just kind of you just kind of stepped in it is really the best way to say it.
Yeah, man. Well, y'all gonna introduce yourself to the people. We're gonna jump right into it, man.
Well, hold on. Before we do that, I mean, I think one thing that a part of the reason why we're having this conversation is because George feel like he said some things that he actually that he learned and want to make sure the people on. So what were the statements that you said?
The statements that I said specifically was in response to what was going on with Palestinians. I characterized very, very, very grandiosely Palestinian people also being Semitic people. And because if you say you care about anti-Semitism, you should care about the anti-Semitism to Palestinians. I said something along those lines and pretty much said that we should almost redefine anti-Semitism to also account for other Semitic people like Palestinians.
All right, now with that being said, pretty much the mistake that George made was he was speaking on some shit in a very flippant way about some things that are much more complicated.
Yeah.
And we got some
almost like engaging in colloquial shit, like trying to
it was rhetoric. It was rhetoric
in this colloquial sense, and then trying to make some very grandiose claims about the actual term anti-Semitism. And when I did my research on it, I found out this white dude in Germany, you feel me? He was like, fuck them people over there, and I'm gonna use this word just for them over there. Like, not for them. I know people speak Aramaic and people speak Arabic, but I don't care about them. Anti-Semitic is just for them people over there because we can't trust them motherfuckers. And I think that when I start to read that, I start to get like, okay, this is how I pissed them off. But yeah, now I'm gonna shut up.
And so now
my student ears are on learn, and you feel me?
Exactly, because as for real niggas who care about like knowledge, information, teaching, that type of shit, education, you got to know when like I need to learn. You know what I'm saying? So we got some educators in here. We brought some educators in here to do that because, as Consciously always says, education is elevation. Let's elevate the conversation. Shakina, Aaron.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks.
Talk to the people.
So ultimately, I think that for a lot of people, the claims that you made felt kind of unnecessary. Like we didn't need to talk. We don't really need to talk about. Yes, there's anti-Semitism within the movement, not because the Free Palestine movement is anti-Semitic inherently, but because anti-Semites show up in places where they can hurt Jews, and that's just what happens. And they'll do it through anything, and they'll attach themselves to anything in order to do that, even if it is the right cause to be supporting. So, ultimately, I was kind of like, well, why were Jews even mentioned in the first place? Like, this is supposed to be about Palestinian liberation. Why are Jews the focus of this conversation anyway? And I kept seeing not Jews censoring themselves, but non-Jews talking about Jews in a situation that has a lot more to do with the state of Israel than it has to do with Jews, especially not Jews in the diaspora. So I kind of want to get into those diasporic experiences as it pertains particularly to the American Jewish experience, and talk about this question, like, why are Jews perceived as white in our society, and how that translates often onto Israel.
Now, so essentially, I mean, for anybody who's not paying attention, if you can't catch on to what she's saying, Jewish is not it's as static of an identity as we are told to believe, correct? Like, we have a perception of what Jewish identity is, and essentially, motherfuckers about to learn that you niggas had it wrong. Niggas had it wrong.
Yeah,
so let's get it
right. So this is a picture of me with a bunch of my friends from summer camp, and as you can see, they're all Black and they're all Jews. And while I'm a convert, none of these people are. They're all born Jews. So, like, I think that is that's a really uniquely important point. I think only one person in this picture is Ethiopian, by the way. Like, and let's talk about some of the ways in which the Jewish community in America has become more diverse, and then we'll talk about the and those contemporary reasons for that, and then we'll talk about Jewish diversity more historically. So next slide, please, Aaron. So the organization that I work for is called B'chol Lashon. We focus on ethnic and racial diversity within the Jewish community, particularly in the United States, but also understanding global Jewish identity, understanding different Jewish identities, different Jewish diasporic experiences, and also minhagim, or cultural traditional practices that differ between groups. B'chol Lashon means in every language, and this is because Jews are a multicultural people who live all over the world. Next slide. And if that's the case, why are so many Jews thought of as white? If we know that there are Jews who live all over the world, why are so many of us thought of as white? Next slide. So the reason I have this here is because largely American demographics are changing. This is a graph. This is the largest Gallup poll shift in history, and it has to do with intermarriage. The approval rate for intermarriage in 1958, which was the year that my grandparents got married, was 4%. But by 2008, when Obama takes office, it's about 86%. And because of the approval rate changing, many Americans become increasingly multiracial, and those American trends also impact the Jewish community. Next slide. So Jews are more diverse than many assume. According to the research at B'chol Lashon, 20% of America's 6 million Jews are African American, Latino, Asian, mixed race, Sephardi, and or Mizrahi. The 20% number includes Sephardi and Mizrahi Jews because their experiences differ, and one of the reasons why we don't see African American, Latino, Asian, mixed race Sephardi Mizrahi Jews affiliated in Ashkenazi spaces is because there's a lot of discomfort there. So next slide, let's talk about the numbers. So in 2011, Jews in UJA, which is the Union for I can't remember what UJA stands for right now, but they their New York study showed that 40,000 of the 400,000 Jews living in the area, there of the Jews living in the area, 400,000 of them were biracial or non-white out of 1.5 million households. So that means that a large portion of the Jewish community is living with non-white people. Let's talk about those numbers as it pertains to the Bay Area. In 2018, the Portrait of Bay Area Jewish Life found that 25% of Bay Area households included a respondent or spouse who was Hispanic, Asian, African American, or a mix of other racial background or heritage. And this year, Pew finally did, because of this, people were previously not asking questions that would identify Jews of color in research, period. So because of this, the B'Chol Hashon, along with many other organizations in the Jewish community, lobbied to make sure that they would ask questions that would identify Jews of color. And so this year, Pew Review released a study, which is on the findings are on the next slide, that of the 90-some% of Jews that identify as white, like about 7% of Jews in the United States identify as non-white or Black, Hispanic, or some other multiracial identity. When you look at Jews under 30, that number more than doubles to 15%. And this is characterized by the fact that we've always been a diverse people, while predominant, and we've been a diverse people since ancient times. Each of these tribes had a unique story, a unique identity that all became part of what is known as the people of Israel. Next slide. And the first diasporic groups that we know of are the Ethiopian and Indian diasporas. So there are about 2 different stories about how Ethiopian Jews arrived in Ethiopia, but one of the stories is that they refused to go into Canaan. The tribe of Dan decided to just go somewhere else. And the other story is that the Queen of Sheba found King Solomon very, very, very wise, went to Jerusalem to study with him, ended up converting to Judaism, and she came back to Ethiopia and converted more people to Judaism. And Ethiopia has actually had one of the longest continuing Jewish dynasties in the world. And then there's the Indian Jews. So the Indian Jews pictured here are from the tribe of Manasseh. Their story is also around the time of King Solomon. And the reason that King Solomon is important is because King Solomon actually unifies Judea and Israel. So, and gives that identity that is associated with Jerusalem. But even then, we see Jews living in other places. So that's why I really wanted to highlight these 2 groups and highlight that particular history. So the Indian Jews went to, or the B'nai Manasseh went to India in search of spices. The story is that they got shipwrecked, and the Indian community there was so welcoming and so nice that they just stayed. And they lived there for about 2,700 years. A lot of them have now relocated to Israel, but there are still some living in, I think, Manipur, India. Next slide. So this slide kind of shows the Jewish diaspora during the Middle Ages, like after both the Byzantine and Roman expulsions. And as you can see, there's Jews going everywhere for all kinds of reasons, escaping persecution, trying to find economic opportunity, or simply just wanderlust. But there's still this centralized identity around Jerusalem that Jews have at this particular point. Now I want to talk about Jewish immigrations to the United States. So as you can see, like I don't know if the lines are easy for people to see on here, but the blue lines illustrate Sephardic Jewish immigration to the Americas, and you can see that starting to happen in 1650. This is really significant because Sephardi Jews actually were the dominant Sephardi and Sephardic culture was the dominant Jewish culture in America until larger German and Russian immigration in the 1800s. There's also a hard cutoff of Russian immigration in 1925 because of US policy against Eastern European immigrants. Next slide. And at this particular point, we are in an America that is changing. There's all kinds of different issues that we're navigating at this particular moment in time, but from anti-Asian violence to anti-Black violence to Latinx, to violence towards immigrants and refugees, as well as a global pandemic. And there's just and anti-Semitism, and there's a lot happening right now. Next slide. But I think that the important issue that we have to remember is that we cannot monolith these stories, that they're all completely and totally different stories. And I think that the person who illustrates this well is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who says a single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes isn't necessarily that they're untrue, but that they're incomplete. And I think that there are a lot of incomplete stories that are being shared about the Jewish community, about the Black community. Those are communities that often tend to get monolithed. So when we hear a Jew say something, then that Jew speaks for the entire Jewish community. Or when we hear a Black person say something, that Black person then speaks for the entire Jewish community. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, I might be mistaken on the person's name, but there's a person who came up with this concept called the Black man's burden. And the Black man's burden is that the Black man is responsible for all Black people, while a white man is only responsible for himself. So there's a lack of seeing people here in this moment as individuals, and individuals with very specific needs and very specific problems. And I think that when we overlay the needs of American Jews or the desires of American Jews onto what Israelis desire, it becomes increasingly muddied. Yes, of course, just like in America, there is racism in Israel. Yes, of course, fascist governments need to be taken down, and there needs to be an equitable solution that allows for indigenous peoples to live in their homelands. I'm very much a person who is for self-determination of indigenous peoples in their native homeland, and Palestinians, Jews, and several other ethnic groups are native, indigenous to that homeland. And I think that when we think of indigeneity in America, we often like to monolith our indigenous population as well, and then we transfer that over onto other nations. And we don't see our indigenous peoples as individual tribes with individual cultures and languages and histories and folklore. We see indigenous people and we see colonizers. But while there is settler colonialism happening in Israel, there are also native Jews in Israel. There are also native Palestinians in Israel. There are native Druids. There are native Bedouins. There are native Samaritans. And all of those people need to be involved in creating a state that has an equitable solution that serves all of those people. And I kind of want to get into self-determination theory. And I think that it's an inherently positive human...
I want to ask you really quickly, why do you think like all of those other groups get ignored, get taken out when we're because ultimately, like a part of the reason why we're having this conversation is that larger narrative is Israel versus Palestine, Jews versus Palestinians. Why are like you said, the Samaritans and the other groups that are indigenous to that area ignored as a part of that larger conversation from your standpoint?
I really think that it's because people are unaware that those populations exist, and that our minds work that way. We have science, we have neuroscience that tells us that we like to think and we like to have binary thinking. We like to think in good and bad. And it's important that we expand beyond that. I think that it's important that as we continue to evolve as human beings, as we continue to address our biases, that we address the bias that we have a tendency as human beings to separate things between good, bad, positive, negative, and we forget to see the nuance. Like a lot of things that we make black and white are really gray.
Oh yeah, and also involve much more than just, you know what I'm saying, like that those two concepts. And I think it's always easier for a narrative if you got a good guy and a bad guy, an antagonist and a protagonist. And so especially when we're talking about things that become a part of world history and world conversations, that's essentially what we sit in. I cut somebody off who was about to say something.
Yeah, just historically, I mean, one of the things we see getting played out today is there was a really robust debate among schools of Zionists and within schools of Zionism, right? We were talking about the right wing and left wing of those theories. And it is the unfortunate case that kind of what won out in most political spheres was the right wing. So there was an acknowledgement and a debate about what to do about, for example, the indigenous Palestinian population. And what happened through a combination of like young deaths for certain Zionist leaders and just, political infighting is the solution that we ended up with was the Nakba, unfortunately, where 750,000 Palestinians got expelled from their homes. But what gets covered up in this conversation is that a long time ago, there was this acknowledgement that from Jewish people in Europe and Russia in particular, but throughout the diaspora, that Palestinians were indigenous and that they had rights to the land, and those rights should be protected in the same way that Jewish indigeneity should have been.
For sure.
Hey, just hey, Ian too, Aaron. I see a lot of people in the comment section right now, you know what I'm saying, going off. Just curious, can you explain, you feel me, your experiences of being not only Jewish, not only an Ashkenazi Jew, but being an anti-Zionist Jew? Like, what is your experiences into? How did you come to being anti-Zionist with also being Jewish?
Yeah, so I grew up surrounded by Holocaust survivors in particular. So, one of the things that like always gets brought up in these stories is the Shoah, the Holocaust. But I grew up with those stories firsthand, which a lot of Jews do, and they kind of all hit us differently. But I was made very aware of my Jewishness very, very young, externally, because where I grew up had a majority Jewish population. So we were pretty much targets of, right-wing protests, neo-Nazi rallies. They love to march through. And so the existence of anti-Semitism, like systemically, was something that was pretty clear to me for a long time. And that made me start reading a lot of the stuff like Theodor Herzl's work and Jabotinsky's work and Ben Gurion's writings. And I mean, there are too many, we'll be here all night if I name them all. But reading that and a lot of what happened in those political spheres is kind of what turned me, because I do believe in Jewish indigeneity to the land, though I do think it can be a complicated question. But what kind of turned me from support and for the need of the deconstruction of that state and the reconstruction of like a united Israeli-Palestinian state was the fact that it was, we need to remove the Palestinians, right? The racism that and Islamophobia that got built into that. And that story is long and complicated. And, there are people everywhere who will try to sympathize. But it is the political theory that runs through Israel today that, Israelis who protest what's going on will tell you there's racism, there's colorism, there's classism that exists. And those got recreated. And that's what makes me an anti-Zionist. And then I think the thing I would cap this off with is that a lot of people call themselves an anti-Zionist and they have no idea what they're actually talking about, right? You can be pro-Palestinian, anti-Israeli government right now without being an anti-Zionist, right? You can be anti-Jewish state without being an anti-Zionist. Zionism is a huge, complex set of political theories. So when I say I'm an anti-Zionist, what I mean specifically, and anti-Zionism is complicated, but I mean specifically, I am against the political cohesion that ended up being, the Israeli political foundations that are based on the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians.
And what you will
Now,
find is that most Jews are, and 2/3 of American Jews are completely and totally against occupation in Israel, and that most Israelis are also against that. In fact, Israel is holding its maybe 7th or 8th election, an expedited election right now to try to de-seat Bibi Netanyahu as prime minister.
And if I can just, sorry, to jump in here real quick, because I think there's a comment that's worth addressing. Talking about colonizing Germany instead of impeding on Palestinian land. So one, the most important fact here that we miss is that Mizrahim and Sephardim, they form the majority population of Israel, right? The majority of Israel is Mizrahim. Those are Middle Eastern and Asian Jews. They come from a bunch of areas. But also, as an Ashkenazi Jew, right, we lost a lot of family in the show. Everybody but my direct lineage. We're from Russia and Poland. Poland is literally run by a neo-Nazi right now. Even if I were to return, the guy in charge is a straight-up neo-Nazi who thinks the Holocaust didn't happen or didn't go far enough, depending on the day. And so I think that's something important to point out is even when you're talking about Ashkenazis, it's not as simple as saying go back to where you're from, because if I were Israeli right now, there are still anti-Semitic laws on the books in Poland. I'd be in danger, straight up.
But we do, as y'all can see, the internet gods have came through and blessed us with the OG Toya G. Toya, say what's up to the people. You are muted.
Give me a moment. Give me a moment. I was already late.
It was like 2-3 seconds. So it was like
there's no need to rush because I was already tardy. You see what I'm saying? But good evening to everybody. Greetings. Just kind of getting some context and some structure, some just general context for the conversation. So I'm just really listening right now. Happy to be with y'all in the comments. Big love to y'all, and definitely Shekinah and Aaron. It's good to have y'all on here tonight. What's good with y'all? Definitely. I'm just listening in though. Keep going.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, now Shekinah, and it is pronounced Shekinah to you.
I apologize. I just came in. I just came in. Fix me.
But no, it happened to George.
Happened to me too.
So and I made sure to listen. So I ain't want.
That's her name.
Fix me every time.
Yeah. Cool. Now Shekinah, I do feel like you was really about to start getting into the. You was breaking niggas off with the information in terms of understanding the migrations and I mean how different identities have come about. Now I feel like you was about to get into the stride of politics today. So let's go ahead and bring the presentation back and pick up where you left off.
So there's not anything left about politics today, but there is more information on what I hope that we can do. Could you go to that cultural competence slide? So ultimately what I hope today is to help people become culturally competent, which is simply just being able to navigate difference. I feel like we spend a lot of time on similarities, and that's great, but we often exaggerate the similarities between groups and the differences between them. And I think that if we, leaned into our similarities, but also celebrated our differences and were curious and asked questions, it would create a cultural sensitivity and a cultural awareness that is completely and totally invaluable in this conversation and in conversations beyond this one. Next slide. So I kind of want to go into a little bit of the work that B'chol Lashon does to work with Jews of color in real time. We have leadership programs for young Jews of color, primarily focusing on helping them navigate their own identities, become leaders in their communities, and learn about Jewish communities around the world. Our leadership programs are Camp B'chol Lashon and our Teen Tzedek Fellowship that pairs young JOC teens with mentors that are in college and helps them build community and relationship online. The next thing that we do is diversity training. Our diversity training workshops convene people together to talk about race, often for the first time. And we do a lot of these trainings in the Jewish community explicitly. After the death of George Floyd, we had an uptick in people wanting to be in conversation about race, wanting to be in conversation about identity, and understanding what whiteness means in the context of America. Next slide.
Just out of curiosity, because I do diversity and inclusion trainings. So you in diversity and inclusion training, you feel me? And you know, one of your fellow white Jewish homies hit you with the, "Hey, I'm not white, I'm Jewish." What is your response?
So I feel like a lot of white people explicitly, because they don't talk about race, feel disconnected from their whiteness. I hear a lot of times people are like, "Oh, well, I don't feel like I'm white. Like that identity doesn't mean anything to me. Like I understand that that's how I function in the world, but it's not something that I pay attention to. It's not something that means anything to me." And it's often because they're not thinking about it. They're not thinking about the implications of it, and they're not thinking about the impact of it. So, I get that all the time. You're not like, but you are definitely white functioning in the society. I don't tell people how they should identify because I don't feel like that is fair or appropriate. And I think that if people don't want to identify as white, even if they function as white in society and they're willing to understand that even if they choose to not identify as white, that they still are given the benefit of privilege in the society because they look white and they function as white and they're perceived as white. I tell people that identity is two parts. Part one is how you perceive yourself, and the luxury for a lot of people is their self-perception is what people see. And part two is how you're perceived by others. And for a lot of people, the how you perceived by others is more impactful to their identity because a lot of people use stereotypes and biases to begin conversations with them. I don't know how many times I've had people start conversations with me with assumptions rather than asking me questions about, what's my name? They want to know why I'm there, why I'm Jewish, or like how I became Jewish. And I feel like, if we built a relationship, then you would know the answer to that question. Like, why are you trying to ask me questions that we are not in relationship to have answers to?
Yeah. There we go. I was on mute. Because because the question that I have is, how those things, like how those things interact. Because I feel like, and I think, you kind of spoke to the difficulty with having these conversations, but it's like, race being something distinct from ethnicity, but kind of being understood as one because of the society that we live in. It seems like it'll create them type of mental barriers that actually is what proliferates the privilege of whiteness, and that's the ability to kind of distinguish yourself outside of it. Like if Jewish people don't call, like if white Jewish folks don't call themselves white, well, they're not going to be in a position where they have to, right? Like they don't. It's not something that they would need to do. Because you're able to get the privilege of whiteness without actually embracing that. You know what I mean? And so, what are the techniques?
There's the flip side of it, where for many white Jews, that whiteness is conditional. So while they'll be perceived as white by people of color all the time, they're often perceived as white people until they say that they're Jewish. So then there's that complex identity of being Schrodinger's Jew, where like for most of the time you are white, but like, and practically, yes, you are, but then there are people who you're actively harmed by the system of white supremacy for not being white. So yeah.
Jewish.
I think the thing as a white Jew, right? Like I was made very aware of my conditional whiteness really young, but because because I wasn't really educated on race and, the whitewashed history we get in public schools, so on and so forth. Right. I kind of didn't understand until I was in my 20s, like how hard I could lead into my whiteness, because that felt like oppression, right? That being white felt like oppression. Because, okay, I could not put on a Star of David. I could not wear a kippah. I could not tell people I was Jewish. But I had to sacrifice everything I grew up with and like core parts of my ethnic identity and history to give that up. But I I totally wasn't aware of, and I think this is true for a lot of white Jews, the fact that that may feel like oppression, but it is still a privilege that we get, that we can hide. I can hide my Jewishness. Shekina can't hide being black, even if she can hide being Jewish. And so it's a punishment in a sense, but it is still a privilege and it is still a safety that we hide behind. But then we come into conversations like we're completely, conscious of what's going on. And I think that's really not true.
Yeah, and I know, speaking of you saying conscious, we was having a conversation, and I think that I feel like black people, we are very conscious of how specifically white evangelicals love to kind of weaponize the idea of being anti-Semitic against black people, like uniquely.
Fuck
And
yeah,
I feel like we was talking to that, you know what I'm saying? I think that that's a part of the conversations that we usually on the Chop Up Show kind of get into, is that we'll talk about the power structure of racism and make a claim like black folks can't be racist. And then it'd be like, but we have this right here, this rap lyric, and this nigga was definitely anti-Semitic. What do you say to that, Chop Up? And it's like, I feel like we would always be like, so I feel like now that y'all are here, like I feel like that's the muddy, more complex of the conversation that I want to kind of get into. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, Shekina dropped the gems earlier before we started. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, this is where we can pick that up.
So I feel like anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism are kind of the core to American white supremacy, in that you need to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant in order to fit in. And that definition has, of course, expanded to include Italians, to include non-Anglos, and even to include Latinos in some cases as white. And so now you no longer need to be Anglo, but you do need to be Christian, you do need to be white, and you do need to be those are the things. You got to be Christian, you got to be white. And if you're not one of those things, you're going to have problems. And for Black people who are Christian, they still have problems with racism. And for Jews who are white, they still have problems with anti-Semitism. And for those of us in between, we have problems with both. So, I mean, like, it's a pretty hard situation to be in when both of your peoples hate you for different reasons. But like, or sometimes it can feel that way. I don't believe that Black people hate me because I'm a Jew, and I don't believe that Jews hate me because I'm Black. But at times it can definitely feel like that, and people definitely say things like that. But ultimately, like, yeah.
Now, I mean, one of the things that Lee was definitely pointing out, and I want to get y'all perspective on, is how it's been weaponized as a way to say, Black people talk about racism, but this is something that's uniquely wrong with them, right? Like sort of what happened with the Asian community, when you had instances of like anti-Asian racism, and motherfuckers looking at Black people like, what are y'all gonna do? Like, what kind of the fuck you mean?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the interesting thing, is like, there is no such thing as Black anti-Semitism. It doesn't exist. It's just anti-Semitism. And of course, there are Black people, there are people in the Black community that are anti-Semites, but that does not make the Black community anti-Semitic. And when we look at the rate of anti-Semitism in the Black community, and like, people have, for whatever reason, created these stupid statistics that make it seem like Black people are more hateful towards Asians or more hateful towards Jews, but really you have to compare that to the population size. So yes, you could say 6% of Black people are anti-Semitic, but 6% of 44 million people is substantially fewer than 2% of hundreds of thousands of people, hundreds of millions of people. So like, and like, you're comparing 13% of the population to 51% of the population and saying, see, look, like, that doesn't make any sense. Because I'm more concerned about the individual people. I'm like, it doesn't matter to me that only 2% of white people are anti-Semitic. I'm worried about those individual anti-Semites. And I'm worried about those people who are walking around with tiki torches. It's not a 2% number, and that 2% is the size of our community. fully, or it's bigger than our community. We're only 6 million people in this country. So it's just like the amount of people in this country who openly hate Jews is kind of scary. And the amount of people who openly hate Jews globally is kind of scary. And so for many Jews, like they feel like Israel is this dreamland where they can go and they won't be harassed for being a Jew, but Israel has problems too. And those problems will come up, and like people will experience racism, classism, xenophobia. Like none of those problems go away because you've gone to Israel. You no longer are experiencing anti-Semitism blatantly, but even in Israel, there's still blatant anti-Semitism. Like there's no that you can go to escape it, but it's nice to like pretend or have an idea that maybe there's a place in the world that we can go to be safe. And I ultimately think that that's what most people want, is a place to go where they can be safe, and a place to go where they can be unapologetically themselves. And for a lot of people, that's what they wanted Israel to be. And I don't think that the current government of the state of Israel is meeting that need for Jews, which is why many Jews are leaving the state of Israel. But like it does meet the need for some Jews who, like Aaron was saying earlier, cannot go back home. Like there are a million after 1948. Yeah. After 1948, about 1 million Arab Jews were exiled from their Arab homelands. They have nowhere to go. They cannot go back home. They're banned. They cannot get back into their original countries. And Ethiopian Jews cannot go back to Ethiopia. They're not allowed to go back to Ethiopia. So, or as residents, because you can't have dual citizenship. So, and it's a very complex situation. There's a lot of people that, for them, Israel is that dream. That is the place that they can be safe, because that's the only place they know. They were kicked out of their home, and I know that that experience is ironic, because Palestinians have that shared experience. But I think if we leaned into that shared experience, that we could create an equitable state that would meet the needs of all the indigenous peoples there.
Yeah.
And I think I have two things to add on this. One, so I think everybody's seen Jacob from Brooklyn, and I think a lot of Jewish people are a little embarrassed by Jacob from Brooklyn. But I think one of the reasons you see a lot of that is that to almost every Jew in America, if not all of us, growing up in a place that like is unapologetically pro-Jewish, that celebrates any Jewish identity, it's foreign. Right, even for those of us who grow up unless you grow up in an extreme Jewish bubble, right, you get pretty quickly aware that Jewishness is not something celebrated or talked about. Like, I mean, raise your hand if they even explained, I don't know, like Yom Kippur to you in school, right? I mean, I grew up in a town that was 50% Jewish, and they didn't explain Yom Kippur.
Yeah, man, we got the Holocaust unit. You know what I'm saying? We went over Anne Frank diary. You feel me?
You read one or two books. You read
it.
Elie Wiesel's Night, and you read Anne Frank's diary, and then you move on.
I ain't never heard of Elie Wiesel. I know Anne Frank.
Yeah, and so that's
like that's also like such a huge issue, is that even when we do talk about Jews in public, it's Hanukkah and the Holocaust, and it's focused on our oppression. And I would say like that's exactly the same thing that happens with education around Black people in school, is that we focus on slavery and civil rights, and there's no conversation about Black contemporaries. There's no conversation about Jewish contemporaries. There's no conversation about what is meaningful to these people culturally, what their cultures are. So it's just like, I wish more people would know about Yom Kippur and the high holidays that are important to us, and not Hanukkah, which is a minor holiday that no one cares about really, unless they're American, because it's right next to Christmas. I don't care about Hanukkah. What? It's a minor holiday. I mean, like, do I like latkes? Of course I like latkes. Do I like lighting the menorah? It's fun. Do I like donuts? Yes. But like at the end of the day, it's a minor holiday.
Donuts are big on Hanukkah?
Like
yeah,
and that's crazy. They treat Hanukkah how we treat Kwanzaa.
So we should be clear, like this is a place where Ashkenazi negativity can come up, because like Shakeen and I are both Ashkenazi Jews, so we're talking about Ashkenazi food we eat on Hanukkah, but that is not the default state of Hanukkah. Like that really depends on the Jewish population you're talking about, and that's one of those things that really gets immediately covered up in the media. It's just you hear about matzo ball
Right,
soup
so-
and you move the fuck on.
Let's actually talk about some of those Jewish populations, because I do have in my slide some resources about how to learn more about those populations. All right, so we have this program called Passport to Peoplehood that is for educators and for children, that teaches children about Jewish diversity through art, music, cooking, and dance. Next slide. And some of the units are China and Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year, so we pair that with the Chinese New Year, and we talk about the similarities and differences in Chinese New Year and Rosh Hashanah, and also the history of Chinese Jews. We have Israel and Sukkot. Sukkot is a holiday, is a feast holiday. And one of the reasons we use Israel and Sukkot is to talk about the nature of all the diversity of the groups that live in Israel. We have Ethiopian Sigd. Sigd is specifically an Ethiopian holiday that that is 40 days after Passover, where Ethiopian Jews would walk to Sinai, where we receive the Torah, and they would pray. And they would pray that they would be able to go back to Israel. Now that they're in Israel, it's become more of an Ethiopian cultural festival called Sigdiyata. And they do Ethiopian cultural things there. Then we talk about Hanukkah and the Caribbean. Majority of when Jews first came to the Americas, many of them were in the Caribbean. Many of them coming into the Caribbean to escape the Inquisition. One of the most interesting facts that I love is that the first and longest operating synagogue in the Western Hemisphere is in San Juan, Puerto Rico. And it has sand on the floor to muffle the sounds of prayers and people coming in and out, so that if people came and they were wondering if people were in there, Jews, they could hide. Then we do Iran and Purim. The reason we do Iran and Purim, Purim is a holiday that celebrates, it's another one of those, they tried to kill us, we didn't die, let's eat holidays. So
it's a lot of them. It's a lot of them.
there's a lot of
About
them.
half of them. Yeah, it's
This is about half of
those.
them.
You didn't get us this time,
and,
motherfucker.
But
Let's
the
drink.
food's fucking good, though. That's
yeah, and Purim it celebrates the victory of the Jewish people over Persians. I really love to say this, but I probably shouldn't say this. Religious Jews, please do not get offended with me. But
Chop up.
I like to
You
say
good. This is a safe space.
I like to say that Queen Esther saved the Jewish people with her WAP. Because ultimately, if it wasn't for Esther being beautiful and getting with the king, he was like, okay, fine. He's like, she hid her Jewish identity, married the king, and then was like, hey, actually, you can't kill my people because those are my people. And then he was like, okay, cool, I won't.
She put that work on him.
It was a good deal.
Work on.
Like she saved the Jewish people. And Uganda and Passover. This is a particularly great one because the Ugandan Jews were actually liberated from Idi Amin on Erev Pesach, so it was kind of like their own Passover, where they had to hide being. It was illegal in Uganda for a long time to be Jewish, and one of the chief rabbi of the Abiudaya Jews of Uganda is Rabbi Gershom Suzomu. He actually sat on my Beit Din when I converted to Judaism. And like, he is a phenomenal human being, and he does lectures. He's on our speakers bureau if you ever want to hear him talk about that. But the Ugandan Jews are an emerging Jewish community. Their story is that in 1906, they converted to Judaism in about 1906, and then officially became part of the rabbinical Judaism in around 2008 with Rabbi Gershom Suzomu's ordination, and then a mass conversion of the Abiudaya Jews. So they were practicing biblical Judaism for a long time, and this is literally because Sime Konkangulu, who was their tribal leader at the time, was given a Bible by the British, and he read it, and he was like, I don't like the New Testament. Let's do the Old Testament. And then he circumcised himself and the rest of the community, and then they were Jews. That's what happened. That's
Hey, yo, you gotta be
version of
listen.
that.
You gotta be listening to the Most High Himself or themself itself.
To be your own moil.
That's
That's
not
To-
no damn self. Circumcise
to
yourself.
Just like
circumcise
Abraham. He was
yourself.
like, I am Abraham. They literally for a long time thought that they were the only Jews left in the world because they were so isolated. And then I think organizations like mine, B'chol Hashon, and Kulanu brought them more into rabbinical Judaism. Once there were so many demographic studies trying to find Jewish communities around the world, new and emerging communities, as well as communities that are from the original diaspora.
Let me jump in here because there's a question I want to answer as well. We got somebody asking if we can speak the language. And so I assume they mean Hebrew, but this is something that really gets covered up when we talk about Jewish diversity. So I speak a little Yiddish and I speak a little Hebrew. I don't know if Shekinah speaks Yiddish, but Yiddish is the kind of Hebrew that a lot of Ashkenazis, but not all, speak. But there are other Hebrew dialects like Ladino, for example, that is common to Sephardi people. So you can't even say, do you speak the Jewish language? Because there ain't one Jewish language.
Yeah.
There's a fuck ton of them.
Which has kind of been
Yeah,
the
there's
point
not.
of this
The
entire. This nigga ain't been listening. Whoever asked that question ain't been
Like, we
listening.
literally
Yeah,
had this
so like
conversation and
in
talked about
addition,
the
I
multiplicity
love
of these
so like
people,
there's
man.
actually a couple of really cool artists that do music in traditional Hebrew languages. Like I think there's there's this guy who does gospel music in Yiddish. He's a Black Jew. He's pretty cool. Then there's this other guy this lady, Sarah Areste. She does Ladino pop music. And there's a band called AWA that does music in Judeo-Arabic. There's a lot of different Jewish languages and a lot of different dialects, and also Aramaic is part of the Jewish diasporic languages. Hebrew is an evolution of that. So it's just do I speak
what you talking about?
Hebrew? Ken, ani medaber Arvit. But do I
Well,
Whenever you ask a Jew,
But,
do you do the thing? It's always wrong.
Do
'cause
I
there's
do
not
the thing?
a Jewish thing.
I'm gonna be real with you, fam.
Yeah,
I think that in general, when you ask people, when you ask oppressed peoples, the people of a minority, can you do the thing? That's usually bad. You just don't never go to a trans person do the thing. Don't never go to a Native American person do that thing.
What would be the thing that the trans person would do?
It's gonna be like, what the fuck? Just don't do it.
What would be the thing
would
that they
be
would
the
be asking a trans person to do?
I don't
Bro,
want to fucking
listen,
explore
let me tell you
that
something.
question.
Transphobia is a motherfucker, and
I feel you.
imaginations run.
That's like asking a nigga, can you rap?
Bro,
right,
I swear,
right.
Kamo, be real.
And I mean,
Yeah, I can rap.
right. And it's just
I can rap.
Also, English is a Hebrew language, or is a Jewish language? Because Jews, that's again B'chol Hashon.
Yeah.
Why do we call ourselves B'chol Hashon? Because Jews live all over the world and speak many different languages.
It's called
There is
diaspora for a reason.
Speak no
Called
Semitic
diaspora for a reason.
languages
Hey, and too,
whatsoever.
I'll be mad if I didn't. I'll be mad if I didn't get into this specifically, because I think that what I've learned since I made this, mishap anti-Semitic comment about trying to redefine shit, I've learned a lot about anti-Semitism. And what I found is that it's a lot of it that's normalized in our society that we don't really think about being anti-Semitic when we're doing it or saying it. Specifically, can we get into the conversation of Jewish money and why when we start talking about people, money, and Jews, why it's automatically, you feel me, that conspiracy theory, white supremacist bullshit. I think a lot of people don't. I think it goes over a lot of people's heads, and they automatically, when we start talking about Jewish people at all, they automatically want to start talking about following the money and economic power. Can you just educate the people on why that shit is textbook anti-Semitic?
So we'd be happy to. There's something I do want to take us back to, though, because in talking about calling out anti-Semitism, especially as a white Jew, I feel like I'd be remiss if I missed this opportunity. But when we talk about calling out anti-Semitism in the Black community, right, Black anti-Semitism, right? I think something that white Jews in particular miss is there is a way to call that out. So Malcolm X is somebody I've read a lot of. And if you haven't read Malcolm X and you're a white Jew, get on that shit. But Malcolm X had some pretty virulent anti-Semitism throughout his life. And what happens is that you'll hear, well, Malcolm X was an anti-Semite, period. And that's the problem, is it's this misunderstanding of, one, the importance of Malcolm X to Black liberation and Black people and Black culture, but just minimizing all his contributions and creating cover for anti-Blackness in the white Jewish community in particular. And so something I do really want to point out is when you call out anti-Semitism, if you are calling out especially another marginalized community, you can't give cover to that. You got to point out, right, the anti-Blackness in the Jewish community, for example, right? One of the things I tried to do, be careful about when I called you out, was not let my whiteness get weaponized against you and have a whole bunch of white assholes go, well, see, this guy's, you know. So that's something
And that's pretty much what happened, I think. That's why I responded. Once I had a whole bunch of white people calling me Nazis and shit, it was like, man, fuck you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, because I think, and like George said, like before, we've spoken on the fact that it gets the terminology gets weaponized against Black people specifically because it's an inroad to some form of criticism to invalidate what Black people are doing the way that Black people use or utilize, calling out racism to invalidate those other positions. But there's a huge distinction there. I think one thing that, and not to be long with it, because I do want to hear from Toya. She's been sitting over there just listening. She says that she's a teacher. She's a great listener. The one thing I do want to point out is how, for example, when you have people like Ilhan Omar calling out the Jewish lobby, and I always point this out because it's the greatest example of the failure of like these mainstream narratives, specifically political narratives, as it pertains to identity categories and being like politically correct and that type of shit. Like calling out the danger and the influence, and you know what I'm saying, the how Jewish lobbies are like influence policy is not anti-Semitic.
No, but it is a
No,
minefield
but
for a couple of reasons. Go ahead.
right,
She said
there's so many. It's a minefield because that's what all lobbies do. So like that's literally what all lobbies do. They all lobby for policy. Why is it important that we're talking about what is the Jewish lobby doing that other lobbies aren't doing? They're all doing the same thing. And
well, I mean, I guess it's more of a question of the agenda, right? Because all lobbyists do it, but in like when we talking about, for example, specifically a lobby organization that is directly tied to Benjamin Netanyahu and the influence that Benjamin Netanyahu has specifically over politics as it plays out in America, but because you don't see Joe Biden developing a posture towards the corruption that we know that Benjamin Netanyahu has been involved with, in a way that's fits how he criticized Donald Trump for doing the same thing.
Yeah, so I think on this, right, it's about, I mean, it goes back to what we were just talking about. You got to be careful about how you call people out. I can call out, a Black leader's anti-Semitism, but if I fall into the trap of racist language, then I'm not really calling out anti-Semitism. I'm being racist. And Ilhan Omar, I think, got the short end of every stick because I think she didn't phrase it well, but I, as a Jewish person, I was more irritated by the white evangelical
response.
Right?
Well,
yeah.
And actually,
how you criticize a Jewish organization to not fall into anti-Semitic tropes.
Because I do, even what I was just phrasing, I do see how just saying it was a specific Jewish lobby she was calling out. So let me be clear. So she wasn't calling out
part of it is the Jewish
all Jewish lobby organizations. It was one specifically.
Lobby.
The problem is Israeli lobby. Israeli lobby.
For Jewish people, but the one you're talking about in specific is for Israelis and kind of the right.
So a better way to phrase it is an Israeli lobby. But see, and that's how that conversation gets complicated because again, she wasn't calling out Jewish people. She was calling out the Israel, the people connected to the Israeli government.
Her criticisms are totally valid. It's just she fell.
It's the language. It's the language.
Yeah.
So like equating just all Jewish people with the Israeli government becomes
Yeah,
problematic.
Right,
I mean,
which
it's
falls
when you
into
say
that dual
Jewish-
loyalty trope.
Exactly.
It falls into
When you
that
say-
dual loyalty trope, and I don't. Israel is not a major part of my identity as a Jew. And I would say like there are a lot of Jews in diaspora where Israel's not like Israel's fun to visit, whatever, but like I don't want to live there. You know what I mean? Like I'm not trying to
Yeah.
live there. Most Jews don't live in Israel. There's 15 million of us in the world, and only 6 million of us live in Israel. Um, I'm not saying that Israel isn't important to Jews, but I mean, like we all have different feelings about it, and when I often find that people have just immediately have the assumption that I love Israel and I'm a Zionist and I hate Palestinians, and that period, point blank, the end. And there's not really anything that I can say that will make them change their minds on that, even though I'm on their side. Like I'm on your side.
Yeah.
I want Palestinian liberation and I want an equitable solution that accommodates all indigenous peoples in that area. And it's just that people aren't even, I would say people, because of their assumptions, are keeping themselves from being able to hear that. And
Yeah.
not every, it's like we can talk about Israel, we can talk about the Israeli government, and that's not anti-Semitic until you start saying, well, Jews, because not everybody in Israel is a Jew. There's 8 million citizens of Israel, only 6 million of them are Jews. So while Jews are a majority, there are also Arab Israelis, there are also Palestinians, there are also Palestinians that are citizens of Israel. There are also other other indigenous groups living in Israel, and
Yeah.
they all, to some extent don't support or not support the Israeli government. So it's a lot more complicated than being like Jews support Israel. A lot of Jews do support Israel, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that Israel is a center point of every Jewish person's identity.
I mean, something to really point out, right? All goyim. I mean, see, and this is not to come at you, but see how easily you went from Israeli lobby to Jewish like there was no stop in your head. It just happened.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you weren't
That
trying to call
connection.
out all Jews,
Right.
but you saw it as a Jewish lobby, even though it's not lobbying on Jewish issues, but Israeli issues.
Israeli
And that's
issues.
something
Yeah.
that goyim really need to like self-interrogate about. Is like,
Yeah, I mean, and it's
put those
how
two things together.
and it's how like political machine actually kind of co-ops that the Jewish identity as that, because that's how they can
Yes.
use it. That's how they can use that anti-Semitism shield.
Israeli
Because if you
lobbies
equate,
like that, the ADL make conversations around anti-Semitism really difficult. And real quick, just because this comment's up here, and I'd like to respond to it, because I think this is a place where white Jews, and I don't want to speak overly broadly, and I'm sure I'm going to
just to read the comment that he about to respond to is Ethereal Beauty said this is a hard conversation to have because as Black people we have to tiptoe around any form of whiteness. And how would you respond?
So, I mean, I think the thing I would say to white Jews first, right, is like we do have to be aware of how easily our whiteness can be weaponized. And that's part of anti-Semitism. That is part of the systemic oppression of anti-Semitism is we come at somebody for being anti-Semitic, even if we're right. And if, I'm this pale, my whiteness can be weaponized against anybody of color instantaneously. And so you got to be really careful about that, and you have to be really aware of that, and you have to start deconstructing the ways you participate in white supremacy without realizing it, because as a Jew you kind of see it everywhere but not necessarily in yourself, and it's there, especially as a white Jew.
And I can appreciate how y'all, because y'all kind of corrected me as well, even as we've had this conversation. But I mean, to Ethereal Beauty's point, I think sometimes even as Black people, we got to remember that it's certain toes that we don't want to step on either, because we understand what that homogenization and the way narratives operate and the way that they function, you know what I'm saying, as well. And so, I mean, I do think that people look for opportunities to try to fit Black people into certain criticisms because of the leverage that they feel like we have with the race card and all that other shit. But I think what needs to be a balance is understanding the way that Black identity interacts with all these things. And then again, those intersections of the Black Jewish identity separate from Israeli identity, and respecting that type of Blackness as well. The last thing I'll say before I pass it back to y'all as we start to wrap this up, Lee's kids aren't sick, so I think he had to go help them out real quick, help out the missus real quick. So he that's why he dropped off. But I want to say this, and I'm going to pass it to y'all. Hopefully we'll get some words for Toya. You know what I'm saying? Hopefully, before we get out. But I want to say that we got to remember that when we talk about socialization, a part of that socialization is understanding how to view other groups of people from who you are, right? So it's like, how do you understand Black people? How do you understand white people, Latino people, gay people, straight people, poor people, rich people? All of that comes from what the world teaches us, and as being Americans, socialized in a anti-Black, racist American society, we forget that the way that we learn about other identities is through the lens of our oppressor. It's through the lens through the lens of whiteness. Yes. And the lens of whiteness operates based off of, as we've said throughout this conversation, incomplete stereotypes, right? To maintain and create and shape a certain narrative that benefits white supremacy in a white supremacist society. And so even Black people get, when it comes to the language that we use, and even like when we're talking about the Jewish money thing and all of that, that stems from being informed about identities through the lens of whiteness. And that's what we need to be careful of. When we adhere to those narratives, we're actually like from an unquestioned standpoint, we're literally become agents of racist supremacy. Ideology. Yeah, without knowing that.
Yeah. And I would say, like, oppressed people can oppress people. And we often utilize white supremacy internally. We internalize it in our community, and then we act on it. And I think in the Black community, it really comes out as homophobia. It comes out as transphobia. It comes out as colorism. It comes out as, like, featureism and self-hatred. It comes out as sometimes as anti-Semitism. It comes out as xenophobia. It comes like all those as sexism, misogyny, all of those are features of white supremacy, but we enact them on ourselves. And in the same way, the Jewish community does the same thing. There's issues with homophobia. There's issues with racism. There's issues with colorism. There's issues with everything every single thing there is an issue for, because there is a Jew of every single ethnic, racial, cultural, gender, sex identity, nationality that you could imagine. And because of that, there's going to be some people are going to make mistakes. People are going to make mistakes. And I think that the thing with mistakes is that we have to acknowledge that, yes, we are fed a fog that we breathe in our whole lives. And we have to acknowledge that implicit bias and work hard to rectify it. And I don't think anything that we can do other than that will change that. We have to get back to this piece of cultural competence of navigating differences as curiosities, navigating differences as something that's not dangerous, but could help you, that helps you become more aware of the people around you, the people in your community. And I think that the tension that we see between Israel and Palestine is really happening in addition to the military force, is not happening with the civilians, is not happening with the people. Of course, there are individual instances and there are systemic issues in Israel and in Palestine. But there are also so many organizations run by Israelis and Palestinians working toward peace, to build businesses together, to build homes together, to build community together. And that is part of the story that people don't talk about.
Israelis are getting arrested for protesting Netanyahu's government. I have Israeli friends who their friends are out there protesting and they're getting arrested like every week. So a lot of things do get covered up with big labels. And then I think, just to jump off your 2 points and kind of complete what I was saying, and I want to say this carefully, because white Jews, even if you are entirely Jewish presenting, we benefit from white privilege and we can enact white supremacy. But it is important not to reduce white Jews, even white Jews who present like me, to our whiteness, because it is kind of distinct from our experience. And right or wrong, it does tend to shut us down, right? Because we hear, oh, we're not oppressed at all. We've never been marginalized. You know, when we have a 3,000 plus year history of oppression and 2,000 year history of oppression, marginalization. And so it's important for white Jews to acknowledge that even in that marginalization, we benefit from white privilege. We 100% have the benefits, the privileges in so many ways. But when you reduce this to our whiteness, you kind of miss, you know, this is why it becomes hard to talk to us, because you're tiptoeing around our whiteness, not engaging with our Jewishness. And that is the part most white Jews adhere to more. We never willingly assimilated into whiteness. We just got put there to hurt Jewish people and to hurt, in particular, Black people in America. And so what we have to do is not reduce white Jews to their whiteness while still being aware of it, but identifying and conversing with their Jewishness, because that's how we're going to build bridges, in my opinion.
But we also have to stop reducing Jewishness to whiteness, because
Yes.
I think that that's, for a lot of non-Jewish people in America, Jewish becomes a stand-in for white. And that is inaccurate. That erases at least 20% of our community. And we have to do a better job of that. And Jewish people who are white presenting, white passing, white functioning, however they want to call themselves, really, if they don't want to be called white, if they don't want to identify with that, need to really be warriors for dismantling white supremacy. Because the only way whiteness won't exist anymore is if white supremacy is dismantled. So, and I think
that is a great approach. Hey, if you don't like being called white, let's get rid of whiteness. Yeah. Let's get rid of that shit. You ain't got to worry about it.
And I think just to call myself out, because Shakina makes a great point, is it was so easy for me to say, well, don't reduce me to my whiteness. And then my brain never thought to say, hey, but also don't reduce Jews to whiteness, because that erases the American Jewish population of color and the global Jewish population of color, which by far suffer the most.
So you hit the mute button. You're muted.
I know. Thank you very much. I appreciate your instructions and directions this evening. For the most part, I have been listening and learning. I think that is also an important part of this conversation. So I was actively doing on screen what hopefully people have been doing in the comments, which is just kind of pulling and collecting from what we know about, you know, our interest in the diaspora. And now we're learning about the different layers and the textures of these diasporic conversations, the Jewish diaspora, the Black diaspora, and its overlaps. And I'm just kind of being, you know, enlightened in a lot of different ways. I think for me, the most interesting conversation, or part of the conversation that I won't say the most interesting, but the thing that got me thinking the most is when we talk about the tendency for Black people to kind of fall into what I call kind of the psychological game, where you play yourself by utilizing the same mechanisms and tools and sounding a whole lot or way too much like the same people you said that you disagree with. So I always use this quote or this phrase when we get in times of sociological turmoil, where it's like you can really identify or check your position or your orientation toward being on the right side or right by figuring out just how much you're parroting the people you said you hate, just how much your language is starting to align itself with the people who in any other instance you would typically be, you know, not aligned with. If you start to sound a little bit too similar to them, you need to check your rhetoric and check where that language and where that, you know, mental and emotional and political, where all those orientations are, because they're invested and rooted in something that by any other name would not smell so sweet. You know what I'm saying? So I think that has just been kind of the most interesting part of this conversation for me, is just figuring out and making sure that as I, you know, unlearn, relearn, and introduce to new language and information, and I'm filtering it through a pathway and a process that's not allowing for me to re-adopt the affinities for oppression that with people that I don't even agree with, right? So that's just been my thing, is listening and learning, and making sure my filter is right. So I appreciate y'all just for breaking some stuff down for me, for real.
Yeah, I mean, and I think one of the most interesting pieces of what we discussed is just separating our conversation of Jewish people from the conversation of the Israeli government. because that's essentially typically what happens. I know I'm guilty of it, and you know this like just Toya said, this has added a lot to my understanding and how we had this conversation. Because again, it's a lot of the criticisms that people have aren't in or are valid. It's just the way that they're framing what it is that they're criticizing is it's inaccurate.
Yeah.
Because we're using stereotypes and narratives and language associated with a historical conversation that's being pushed, as opposed to the reality of the people who are living their everyday lives in not only in Palestine and in Israel, but also in the United States and worldwide. Because identity no longer functions to be these concrete things. We see them again when we learn about the intersections of life. We start to understand that these things are much more complicated than MSNBC, Fox News, New York Times, and the rest of the motherfuckers allow us to understand them. Now, to get y'all information, Shakina, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me at Shakina across platforms, just Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok.
Is it spelled like your name is on here?
It's spelled exactly like my name is spelled on here. And also feel free to reach out to B'chol Lashon. I do want to say, like, you know, I think the reason that I spend time criticizing Israel is because I love Israel. Because I want Israel to live up to its claim, or to live up to its ability to be a place that upholds Jewish values, and a place that upholds and you know, I criticize Israel like I criticize America. I criticize America because I want my home to be better. I criticize Israel because while that place is spiritually important to me, I want it to be better. I want it to be a place that is equitable and just for all the people who inhabit it, live there, pray there, worship there. And you know, I think that is a core of Jewish values, is equity and justice. And at this particular point, I'm dismayed and sad that Israel is not living up to that.
Shut up, Aaron. Where can we find you?
So you can find me at Rhythm Inc. on TikTok. Pretty much just hang out there. But I post psychotically frequently, so you'll have plenty of chances to talk to me. And I really welcome, you know, obviously we don't have all night to answer questions here, but if anybody has questions, right, you know, as long as they're in good faith, I will spend way too much time answering them. And I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. And hopefully I've demonstrated right that I'm really coming at you guys in good faith. So whatever you want to talk about, Israel, Palestine, Zionism, history, I'm there. Come find me.
For sure. Well, we are reaching that hour and a half mark. We ran a little long on this one. But definitely appreciate the insight, appreciate the nuance, how everything was broken down. Y'all can find me at The Political Plug on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Toya, same thing, at Toya G. You want me to do it for you? Are you unmuted? Did you unmute? Or I can do it?
Are you gonna worry about the mute button all night?
Well,
ToyuhGee. My name is Toya G. Come holler at me. It was a question in the chat from New Era Kang. I am not Greek. I didn't pledge nothing. I am Toya Fi Toya in this thing.
She said Toya Fi Toya. Broke Fi broke.
We ain't crossing no line, so we good. It's just me. It's a line of one. But yeah, that's that on that.
And y'all know, as usual, if you were watching this from the Consciously page, make sure y'all make y'all way to the Chop Up Show on YouTube. That is the Chop Up Show on YouTube. If you are watching this on the Chop Up Show on YouTube, make sure you go over to the Consciously page and subscribe to at the Consciously on YouTube as well. The new episodes are up, so make sure y'all check out. If y'all want a replay of this conversation, want to pick up on any of the game that was spread or any of the resources that was spoken to, you can find this as well as past episodes on Spotify and iTunes. When y'all go there, make sure y'all follow us and subscribe, like, comment, rate, all of that. If y'all want to see the platform grow, that's all you got to do. You know what I'm saying? With that being said, it's been another Monday. Happy Memorial Day. Hopefully you memorized the people you wanted to memorialize.
I don't know what you try to slide.
Memorialize.
Hopefully you did.
All right, listen. All right, police. All right, grammar police.
I want to give my specific. I'm not the. Don't call me the police. I rebuke that. Aaron and Shakina, I appreciate both of y'all. Definitely, I just want to give my personal thanks. My little technological issues, y'all held it down and held the spot on, just in terms of make the Monday thing happen. So thank y'all so much for popping in with us and making sure we, you know what George say, education is elevation. Y'all definitely took us up a little bit higher. So personally,
thank you for having us on. We really appreciate the chance to speak with you guys.
For sure. So we're gonna end the show the same way that we start the show. Be easy.
Me, my guys, we really live. Lord, forgive me, pay my tithes. Please don't have me reach inside. And that's in the console. Keep the semi when I ride. Let off Henny when I drive. In the city, we gon' slide. Bet I be there.